So we're doing a series called Holy Dust. It's about learning to follow Jesus as our rabbi so closely that we can even pick up the dust off his own sandals. And so we're moving through the book of Mark, and there's a lot going on. I just want to read this section, and then we're going to highlight a couple points here. Mark chapter 3, verse 7. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and other regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him. For he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. There is something about proximity with Jesus that'll change your life. I'll just leave it at that. All right. Put that in your notes and I'll stop there. Whenever the evil spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell who he was. Jesus was at the early part of his ministry here, and there was a lot to get done. And so he wasn't trying to launch a PR campaign. Does that make sense? And so he was saying, look, just let me be in the present, right? Don't try to go around and pre-advertise things. So, but listen, even evil spirits recognize who Jesus is, people, right? The devil sometimes knows the Bible better than we do, okay? But you could know the author of the Bible better than he does. All right, I'll stop there. Now, Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, designating them apostles. Now, look, there's a lot of people following Jesus. There's at least 70 who were also kind of like his followers, right? They went everywhere with him. And then Jesus went up on a mountainside, and then he came back down. He had prayed. You'll see this in other Gospels. And then he appointed 12 apostles that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed. Then we go through the names of the 12, which we often know through church history as the 12 disciples. All right, there is so much going on here, but I told you that Mark is a fast-moving book, all right? It kicks up a lot of dust as well. It doesn't unpack a lot of things that Jesus said. It focuses a lot on things that Jesus did. And that's important for many of us, because a lot of us want to grow and learn to do the things Jesus did as well. Unfortunately, this passage makes some assumptions in those first century readers that may not be applicable to us today, and so it may not quite fit as we're reading through it at this pace. Mark is assuming you and I are first century Jews, and we understand the role of a rabbi to disciples. I want to posit this for a little bit this morning because some significant things are happening in our midst. And if we are talking about learning to apprentice ourselves to Jesus, it's probably important that we understand why and how. And even in this, I want you to notice a couple shifts in term that Mark does in a consolidated way, even though as the gospel continues, it gets unpacked more. Notice in verse 7, Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake. Now, that's a different word that you'll see in verse 13. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to those he wanted. He appointed 12, designating them as apostles. So we have disciples and apostles. The word disciple probably literally would just be a follower or a learner, right? So how many of you have ever started a job before and had to follow somebody around? Kind of learn the ropes, right? You were a disciple of that chef or that waiter or that technician or whatever you're doing, right? And so Jesus had a lot of people who were following and learning from him, and that was important. But then we see in verse 14 that he changes terms, takes 12 out of that group and calls them apostles. Now, the Greek word literally means not, we translated apostle, but it literally means to be an emissary. It means to be a sent one. There's something significant about what happens as you disciple yourself to Jesus. At some point, his goal in your life is to send you out, to send you into the world. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean totally across the world, but it might mean send you right into your workplace with a different mission, to be an emissary, right? To represent God, to represent the Father like Jesus represented the Father. And so apprenticing yourself to Jesus should move your life from learning to doing. Go like that if that makes sense, okay? And so we begin to see this over and over again. When you experience healing in your life, then that healing isn't just about you. You learn to be a healer in other people's lives. When you experience forgiveness in your life, the forgiveness isn't just about you. You and I need to grow to be a more forgiving person. What you get to receive, you need to learn to give away. This happens over and over again. The things that Jesus teaches you in your life, he intends for you not to hold on to, but to release to others. You'll see it multiplied in your life when you give away the things God has given you. When you find sobriety in your life, that isn't just about you. It starts there, but you find even when you get to step 12 that at some point you feel compelled to go and share that news with others, that there can be freedom in other people's lives. You experience love and acceptance in your life. You are called to be a more loving and accepting person. So you may have been a Christian for 10 years, but many of us are just walking in 1 year of maturity 10 times over. That is getting stuck. You see what I'm saying? We get stuck here. You have 1 year sobriety 10 times. That isn't what sobriety. Now, I'm not saying to give up, but I'm saying that there's more to sobriety than white-knuckling it 10 times over. That there comes a point that you move from just being sober to reconnected and repurposed in your life. You might have 1 year of marital maturity in your life 10 times over. You know? You've been following through on one commitment out of 10 in your life and think you're doing good. When part of growing in our lives is learning to follow through, let our yes be yes and our no's be no. You might have 10 years of posting about social issues in 1 week of actually doing something about it. There is something, oh man, he's poking hard today. Listen, this isn't about condemnation. This is about conviction to grow. This is about Jesus inviting you and I to a whole new way of living. And so we aren't just studying Mark because it's a good Bible study. We're studying Mark because if we want to be people that do what Jesus do, we got to be like Jesus be. Okay? And so have you ever noticed how many times in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus is referred to as a rabbi? I mean, you know, I still run into people today, he was Jewish? I thought he was Catholic. Like, no. Jesus was Jewish, and so sometimes we need to understand the context of his life to better understand the context he fits inside of ours. I mean, here's just you can write these passages down. They'll go up on the screen. Just a couple references. Mark 9:5, Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here." Mark 10:51, "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." John 1:49, then Nathanael declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." John 3:2, this is Nicodemus speaking. He came to Jesus that night and said, "Rabbi, we know you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the miraculous signs you are doing if God were not with him." Now, could it be we're missing something in understanding Christ as our leader today by not understanding the importance of a rabbi back then? That's my point that I want to get to. And so I'm going to jump tracks a little bit out of Mark today, and we're going to look at Matthew chapter 4 just for a moment here. And this is like where Mark just says, hey, he called some disciples. Now, Matthew unpacks that a little bit for us. Matthew 4:17 says, "From that time on, Jesus began to preach, 'Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near.'" Now, if you have an NIV Bible, you'll see this title, "Jesus Calls His First Disciples." That heading is important. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. That means it's the beginning of the workday. They weren't repairing their nets, they were preparing their nets. And immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Now, I've first read, that sucks for the dad. I remember how many times growing up, my dad's, it's whatever, Saturday, and my dad's got all these yard work things planned for us, the mower's out there, the trimmer, whatever, and he's all ready for us to work together. And, of course, being a teenager, I'm like, no way. And, oh, bummer, coach just called. I have football practice today. And I'm out of there. And my dad's like, what the heck, And anyway, verse 23, Jesus went through Galilee, teaching their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. All right, listen, if you think that they just totally bailed on their father, then you and I are reading this from a Western perspective. Let's see if we can engage it from a rabbi and first century Jewish perspective. Let's get some context here. So I don't want to just give us a history lesson this morning. I want to help us on a journey to a rather profound conclusion. So, Jewish people believed that God spoke, and that he spoke directly to Moses. Now, Jewish people believed that the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were an exact copy of what God said. Okay, and Tyler did such an incredible job, I think it was last week, talking about the difference between the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, and the Mishnah, some of the things that were added on. So we call it the Torah, but the Torah, those first 5 books, is literal, the translation of that is the way. So Jewish people believed that the Torah was the way, the truth, and the life. It was so important to them. Education wasn't just a luxury, it was a means of survival for the Jewish people back then. It was cultural survival. It was racial survival. It was religious survival. That's why it was so important that they maintained the way. Go like this if you're hanging with me for a second, okay? And so the way became so important. And so rabbis were some of the most esteemed people in those days because they taught the Torah. They led in the synagogues, and the synagogues were the central place where community happened. And so it was so important that every generation had someone who could continue in the way and continue in teaching the truth in a world of all kinds of other religions and continue showing the life of what it meant to be a people of God, a Jewish people. And so this became significant. So a quick poll here. How many of you have more than one Bible in your house? Now, don't count your phone because I know you can have 100 of them in there, but literal paper Bibles in your house. How many have more than one? Keep your hands up. More than 2. More than 3. More than 4. Wow, we got some awesome Christians here. More than 5. More than 6 Bibles in your house. More than 7. 8. 9. 10. I got to speed this up. My goodness. 11. Well, you got so many. Your prize for having the most is we're going to give you a brand new Bible. No, all right. Listen, owning a Bible and knowing a Bible is a very different thing in your life, okay? So listen, it was so important in those days that they understood the Torah. And so starting at the age of 6, kids started going to school and in the synagogue. By age 10, by 10 years old, most Jewish kids knew the Torah by heart. How many of you have the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy memorized? That's freaky. I can't find the right page in my Bible when I get there, right? So by 10, most kids had that memorized by heart. That's why in the Gospels, Jesus, in Mark's Gospel, Jesus would quote a passage, and he didn't have to explain where it was. It was no big deal. Everybody knew exactly what he was talking about. He didn't have to say, if you'll turn to scroll number 375, 3/4 down the scroll, the phrase starting with, right? He didn't have to do that. He would just quote it because people memorized it because it was that important to them. It was the way, the truth, and the life. And so rabbis taught the Torah, and that's why they were the most respected people of their culture and their society back then. But something happened at about the age of 10. Kids, boys, started sorting themselves out. There were those who just seemed to have a real grip on the Torah and those who kind of struggled with it. And some had abilities to memorize and some just couldn't get it. How many of you know what I'm talking about in school? Okay, how many of you, let's take math for instance, how many of you, math was pretty easy going on through school? 6 of you, great. How many of you knew kind of early on math was going to be an issue? Okay, good. How many of you was different? How many of you it was English was really easy for you? You love reading, you love the books, writing reports. How many of you English struggled with? Maybe a dyslexia or, okay. Okay, so you get what I'm saying, right? At about age 10, you start getting separated out. Those who didn't make the cut after the age of 10, if you were starting to show that learning the Torah was enough, which blows my mind, then what began to happen was your destiny was kind of made for you. You didn't stay in the synagogue to learn more. You now carried on your father's business. And so that's why you see Matthew saying this, that, they were with their father. Why were they doing that? Because their father were fishermen, right? And so if you were in the midst of this and you weren't memorizing good enough the Torah, then your next thing would be, okay, now you know what your job's going to be. You're going to be a carpenter. You're going to be a fisherman. You're going to be a baker or whatever, right? And so this would begin to happen. But there were the others who were invited to study further. Let's call it college. They were 10 to 14 years old. They became a part of what was called the Bet Talmud. And the Bet Talmud was the opportunity now to learn all 39 books of the Old Testament, Genesis to Malachi. By the age of 14, they had it memorized. Why? Because it was the way, the truth, and the life. It mattered. It wasn't just trying to get an Awana badge. It was something so much greater. Our culture, was dependent upon you to carry the story. You remember when Jesus' parents found him in the temple? How old was he? He was 12. And what did it say? They marveled at his understanding of the scriptures because he was Bet Talmud. He was in the midst of it. He knew it because he wrote it. But anyway, he knew it. Okay, so if you showed yourself to be the best of the best by 13 or 14, then a rabbi would look at you and realize you can go further. Let's call it grad school at age 14. And so you were invited to be a Talmudim. Now, Talmudim, the translation of that word, is disciple. The rabbi would look at certain boys in that culture, and he would look for those who not only knew the book in terms of memorization, but knew the book in terms of understanding. And he would look at these boys, and then out of those, he would select only a certain few, because the goal wasn't just to make them smarter. The goal of a rabbi was to make them just like him. Does that make sense? Because the rabbi not only knew the scriptures, he had a way of living the word. And so he would live the way, the truth, and the life. And if you were going to be his disciple, you were going to learn to live the way, the truth, and the life. If a rabbi believed in your potential, and he could see something in you that maybe you couldn't see, he would look at you as a 14-year-old and say, "Come, follow me." What a privilege it was for a rabbi to call you out of all the rubble and say, "I see something in you." And the parents would immediately say, "Get your butt out of here." Right? Maybe in a more blessed way, but. So at the age of 30, where a disciple would traditionally become a full rabbi, Jesus is now finished grad school, let's say. And he's walking along the beaches, and he's walking along places, and it is time for him to choose his disciples. He did not walk into the synagogue and look for the best and the brightest. He walked on a beach, and he found some fishermen, and he said, "Come follow me." And immediately they dropped their nets and left their father, because this rabbi saw something in them that they couldn't see in themselves. Why were they fishermen? Because they weren't disciples. They hadn't passed the test with everybody else. They were losers, abused and abusers, whores, gamblers, lost, fearful, ADHD. No wonder they couldn't memorize it. Dyslexic, broke. And yet Jesus walked along the beach, and for some reason he would look at somebody and he'd say, "Come follow me." Do you realize the significance of that? I'm telling you, folks, if Jesus has looked at you and invited you into new life, you are so flippin' special. He is not looking at your resume. He is not looking at the mistakes you've made or the tests you've failed in life. He is not looking at your pedigree, your religiosity. He's not looking at your gender anymore. He's not looking at your race color. He's not looking at your bank account. He's looking at you, the true you that was created in God's image. And he says to you, "Come follow me." Because he knows if you spend enough time with him, you'll be like him when it's over. And you will walk in the way and the truth and the life like Jesus did. Those 12 ragamuffins changed the entire course of history because they dropped their nets and followed Jesus. Let's stand.
Thanks for tuning in to a message from the Sanctuary Church. For more information and media, go to our website at thesanctuarywestside.org or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube.